I usually don't make videos on theological topics, even though I have kind of made one video on a theological topic before. But I had this idea the other day of this notion of subversive affirmation. Now, this is not my idea, but it's an idea often talked about in, I guess, more modern philosophical circles. And I thought about how this idea can relate to the resurrection of Christ in the Bible. Now, the idea I'm going to present to you, I mean, I take myself to be a Christian and I do believe in the authenticity of Scripture, but I don't think you have to be a Christian to understand this concept in the way it relates to Christianity. I think you can, if you just for a moment view the story as a story, if you want to, you can kind of understand how this concept maps onto the resurrection, the death and resurrection of Christ. So, subversive affirmation is this idea. I guess it could be defined simply as undermining a thing by affirming it. Now, what does that mean? Well, it means to kind of negate something or kind of take the power away from something by embracing it. What would be some examples of this? Well, it's kind of hard to point out a real example off the top of my head, but I can kind of lay out a fictional example here. Let's say you live in a society where um, if you wear blue, like wearing a blue shirt is considered a bad thing. And you yourself agree with this notion that wearing a blue shirt is a bad thing, and there are people who wear blue shirts and they're bad. They're kind of the enemies of society, and they're trying to get over on society. Maybe they're trying to get power in society. But anyways, wearing a blue shirt is a bad thing. Your way of negating their, I guess you could say, countercultural power in relation to the status quo would be for you yourself to start wearing a blue shirt and kind of exaggerate the actions of these transgressors in order that you kind of normalize their behavior, but not in a way to actually affirm it, but to affirm it in a way where you are taking the power away from the the people who are trying to transgress, because you kind of dumb it down to something very basic and simple. So this is kind of the idea of subversive affirmation. There's plenty of real world examples you could apply this to, and artists do it all the time. So now I'm going to relate this idea to the incarnation and resurrection of Christ. Now, so Christ's death and resurrection, well, we have to understand how this is understood as subversive affirmation by first understanding what the purpose of this death and resurrection is. Well, the purpose of the death and resurrection, and sorry I misspoke earlier, I said incarnation, but it's related, um, is to defeat death. Now, okay, obviously we still die, but what he means by that is it's defeating death in order that you can have eternal communion with God in an afterlife. So the whole purpose of Christ coming down to earth is to provide that opportunity to save man, and so that way he can transcend the fallen nature that he has through communion with God. That's kind of an oversimplification of the purpose of the incarnation of Christ, and he provides this opportunity for us through death, through his crucifixion. This, you know, provides the metaphysical opportunity for humanity to be brought into communion with God, which before Christ's incarnation and before his death, we lacked the opportunity to do that because of our sinful nature. Now, how does this relate to subversive affirmation? Well, what's being affirmed subversively here is death. Christ himself affirms death. He takes on death. He embraces death in order to defeat death, so that way humanity has the potential to transcend it. They will transcend it no matter what, but you'll either end up in hell or heaven. But no matter what, you're going to transcend the cessation of life, which was proper to the fallen human nature before Christ. So that's the purpose of his death, is to take on death and defeat death. So he's taking on death in another sense to negate it. And that's why this notion of subversive affirmation applies perfectly to the death and resurrection of Christ. So I do think, and there's some. I'm not the first person to say this. Actually, Saint Athanasius in his book on the Incarnation says pretty much what I'm saying. He doesn't use the word subversive affirmation, but he does say basically that, yeah, Christ takes on death to defeat death and provide an opportunity for humanity to become in communion with God and live in a eternal paradise. So he takes, I think Saint Athanasius said something like, um, he takes the most humiliating thing, which is, or the most ignoble death, which would be crucifixion at the time in the Roman Empire, and makes it the most noble death through transcending it and resurrecting. So and he also does it, so in a way he kind of does a double subversive affirmation. He affirms death to defeat death, but he also affirms death by crucifixion to defeat this notion that death by crucifixion is dishonorable, which was the belief of the Roman Empire. So I guess in a sense there's also a double subversive affirmation going on here. So yeah, that's pretty much it. I just thought that was an interesting idea that could be mapped onto the Gospels.